Today, I am talking about episode completion rates. And so in this episode, my aim is to teach you three things. The first is, what is an episode completion rate? What is a good episode completion rate? How to improve your completion rate? And I guess four things, because I'm going to share my completion rate at the end of this. So stay tuned and we'll see where I'm at. We'll see where you're at. And I'll help you try to get a better completion rate, because that's the goal. So an episode's completion rate is how long on average people listened to that episode. So did your listeners listen to 100% of a particular episode? Did they listen to 65% of a particular episode? Did they listen to 19% and then they dropped off and turned it off because they thought the episode was boring or it wasn't adding value or they didn't hope to learn what they thought they were going to learn? So your episode completion rate is the percentage of listeners who listen to an entire podcast episode. And obviously you want people listening to the whole episode or the majority, the vast majority of each episode, but that doesn't always happen. But that is the goal. If your listeners are listening to the majority of every one of your episodes, you're in a good place. If they're not, then I'm going to give you some strategies here in a moment to entice your listeners to keep listening to your episodes. And so where can you find your episode completion rate? Well, for Apple, you can go to Apple Podcast Connect, log into your account, pull up your show, and there you can literally go through each episode and see if people were liking it and see how long they stayed before they dropped off. You can also use Chartable. And on Chartable, you can see Spotify's episode completion rate as well. And those are the two main listening platforms. So those are the ones I'm going to mention. Don't know if there's other ways to check completion rates. There probably are, but Apple's obviously like one of the most popular, as well as Spotify. So that's where you're going to go to check those two platforms out. Now, what's a good completion rate? Well, I don't know that there's like an industry standard. It's funny, I still produce a show a couple years ago, and we were in a meeting, and this was a podcast network, fairly large show, and they were recommending for what they saw with their clients and people on their network that if it's an interview-based show or like a solo cast type of show, we're not talking about like narrative or true crime, for interview or solo, kind of the two most popular formats, that a good episode completion rate was around like 70-75%. And that sounds about right in my mind, or that sounds good in my mind rather. So I'm going to say a good episode completion rate is about like 3/4 of the entire way through the episode. And again, that's not really based on any data. That's just based on my opinion and kind of an opinion I derived from that meeting I had several years ago. I mean, if people are listening to 3/4 of your episode, that's pretty damn good. What's a bad completion rate? Again, it's kind of just an opinion, but I mean, if someone's listening to like 25% or less, you've probably got some work to do on keeping people engaged and excited so that they continue to listen. Say like 25%. On like the low end, maybe, 50 to 60% is like the medium range where you're not doing horrible, but you're not doing great. And then let's call it, for the sake of this, and in my mind, what I think, 75% or better is good. And if you're getting into the 90s, 85, 90, 95, that's stellar. And that's my opinion. Should I say again that it's my fucking opinion? I think I'm going to say it one more time. That's my opinion. But again, the higher, the better. It means people are engaged, they're hungry for what you're putting out, they're paying attention, and they're good listeners. And in turn, that means you're putting out good content. So do some research, hit up the Googles, and check it out, and then form your own opinion. But more is better. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so how to improve your episode completion rate? Well, I've got several things here. There's not one right answer, but I think if you focus on some of these and put these into your strategy, you're going to be in a good place. And these are just tips that over time, if you start implementing, you should see a better completion rate. Unless your show is just hot garbage, you're not a good host. You might think you are, but maybe you're not. Maybe your content isn't great. Maybe your guests aren't good. Maybe your editing isn't good. In any case, that's a conversation for another day. But that's just from some food for thought. I think it's good to be introspective with your show and be constantly adjusting, questioning, improving, and getting real. And sometimes you have to get real and be like, dude, why aren't people listening to my show? Well, here's some things to improve upon if they aren't listening to your show. So the first is to hook listeners early. So I'm trying to do this more and more. I went to a podcast conference 2 months ago in Salt Lake City, Utah, called the Outliers Podcast Conference. And this one guy, Roger, he was talking about to lead into the show with what you're going to be talking about, or rather like what you hope to teach or what problem you hope to solve for your audience. So it's like problem and what we're going to do about that problem at the top of the show. And so that way you're leading in right away. Your listener knows, okay, by listening to this episode, I'm going to learn like X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to learn these 3 things. So hook listeners early, let them know what they can expect. So that's going to kind of tease them to want to keep listening so that they learn or they hear about those things and mention those things at the top of the show. The next is breaking the fourth wall. And I actually talked about this 2 episodes ago. So go check that out. Breaking the wall is when you address the audience, you recognize their presence and you talk to them. And I think that makes them feel special. It helps them take a pause to think about what you're saying, and it gets them more involved in your show. When you address the audience, you're breaking the fourth wall, and it just deepens the connection with your listeners, and it allows them to realize like, oh, this person, they're talking to me. I love this show. This is a host that I like. This is a show that I like. And it shows in turn that like you're thinking about them. And I think listeners, we all want that, right? We want to be in the story. We want to be in the episode. And so addressing the audience is a great way to help engagement, and that may increase your episode completion rate. The next is probably the most important. I say put this at number 3, although this is going to be key, and that's use data from previous episodes. So if you're noticing that certain episodes or certain topics are getting a higher completion rate, like use that data, kind of study, okay, what did I do in those episodes? Why are people listening all the way to the end? How did I title that episode? How did I talk to the audience? What did I present them with? And then kind of copy that formula and rinse and repeat. You're not going to like talk about the same exact thing, but you can talk about that topic from like a different perspective, or put a different spin on it, or like elaborate more than you did in those previous episodes. But using that data and focusing on the analytics of what has been performing really well for you, and then kind of copying that, rinse and repeat, elaborate, that's going to work wonders. And I think that, and it doesn't happen right away, guys, any of this stuff, but that will help you improve your episode completion rate. It's social proof, more or less. The next is short episode hacks. So it is true that shorter episodes, people tend to listen to longer. You know, there's like a 7-8 minute episode out there. It's going to be easier to consume the whole thing than like an hour and a half episode. And actually heard on Marketing School, Eric Sue and Neil Patel, they've talked about this a little bit, and their episodes are short. And so that has improved their completion rate. But I don't know that they on purpose were like, we're going to do short episodes as like this hack because then we're going to get a higher completion rate. And that may help our rankings within Apple, or whatever the case may be. That's going to keep people more engaged to the end, where we can give them a call to action, where we try to sell them our services, whatever it may be. They're right that short episodes get listened to more and longer. But I don't know that you need to like put out short episodes just for the sake of like doing some hack where you're like, oh, I'm going to get like a higher completion rate because I'm putting out a 7-minute episode. That being said, if you're going really, really long, think about that. Is like all the content in your hour-long episode relevant? Is it good? Could you cut that down, thus improving the amount of time that people listen to that episode? Just think about, like cutting filler or really focusing on content that resonates or that you tried to hook people in with in the beginning. If you find yourself drifting from that and there's filler or unnecessary stuff, cut that down, because it is true that shorter episodes have higher completion rates. And should I say that again? I keep saying that. In any case, find what works for you, what works for your niche and your type of content. And when you're done, be done. Don't go longer. And I think you'll find if you keep things good with good content, but a little bit on the shorter, more concise side, that should help your episode completion rate. The next is optimize your audio quality. Pretty simple, pretty easy to do now. I'm not going to talk too much about that. I have in the past, but if it sounds good, people are going to want to listen to it longer. If it sounds like shit, probably turn it off earlier. Dude, there's one podcast I listen to. I'm not going to mention. It's these two SEO experts. They talk about growing your presence online, your website, getting it to rank better on Google. And presumably, these guys make a lot of money. I don't know how much, but their brand is huge and they're well known. And the show is well known. I'm not going to name it. But it's like, man, I listen to the audio quality and I'm like, what's up with this? Like, it's not very good. You would think like people of that caliber would have like mastered the art of getting decent audio. If your audio doesn't sound good, it's going to turn people off. It's 2024, everybody, and we need good audio. Keeps everyone engaged. It keeps people wanting to listen. The next is storytelling and adding in personal anecdotes. Be strategic when you do this. Don't waste time and don't just talk about something in your life because you want to talk about it. Like it's your time to vent on the microphone or be funny or tell some story. If you're going to do it, make sure it relates to the topic in some creative way. And then I think people will buy into that and they'll want to keep listening because they'll want to hear how the story ends and they'll want to hear what's unfolding in the story. But don't just do it to do it. Try to, and I don't know if I'm great at this, but I've tried to mention a couple things like that podcast conference Outliers in Utah and Eric Sue Marketing School and just some personal stuff that I try to tie in so that you learn a little bit more about me as a host, but that also is relevant. Okay, so lastly, I want to share my Apple episode completion rates for you. I'm pulling it up right now. Okay, good thing it didn't log me out. It's a pain in the ass to log into this. Okay. So I'm going to pull it up for the last 60 days because that is a preset that you can choose within Apple Podcast Connect. And I'm going to start from episode 88, which was released January 31st. That's 55% on a 31-minute episode. Not great. The next episode 89, Starting a Podcast in 2024, followed these 12 tips for success. It's the name of the episode. 22 minutes long, 90% completion rate. Solid. Episode 90, 87% completion rate on a 12-minute episode. Episode 91, also a 12-minute episode, 74% completion rate. Episode 92, a 14-minute episode, 78%. And this is weird because this one, episode 92, monetize your podcast with Patreon, Supercast, and Apple Podcast subscriptions. I've noticed anytime I talk about monetization, my downloads go up because we all love money. People like to talk about money. People like to learn about money and how they can make money with their content. So funny enough, this episode has more downloads than some of the others in the weeks surrounding it. But the episode completion rate is 78, which is a little bit lower than some of these other ones. It's just interesting. Episode 93, 23% completion rate. That's a 43-minute episode. That is not a good completion rate, guys. The next lowest one is 55, which was episode 88. And I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you. But episode 94, 97%. And that's on a 9-minute episode. Episode 95, it's an 11-minute episode. And that's a 60% completion rate. So those are some of my numbers for the last 2 months. Also kind of taken to account that the longer an episode's been out, the more opportunity people have had to listen to it. And so some of your older episodes, the completion rate is really high. That's even better because people have had a longer time to listen or they've had a longer time to tune out and drop off early. So it's kind of just a different data set and the way that you look at that. That's it. I wanted to teach you about this today. And it's important, one, because it kind of gives you a roadmap for your content. You'd be like, oh, this type of content is working. People are listening for a long time. And this type of content, these topics that I'm covering, people aren't listening for a long time. And so use that to your advantage and brainstorm around the stuff that's working and double down on that. I feel like personally, I'm a better fan on doubling down, and I do better on doubling down on what's working and putting efforts into that than trying to really improve the stuff that's not working. I mean, you do have to kind of figure out what's not working and try to get it to work. But if you've already got a type of content or a type of show that's crushing it, double down on that, triple down, and use that to your advantage. And if your listeners are liking it, then that's what they want to hear more of. So that's it, guys. Want to say thank you for listening. If you're looking for more information on podcast growth and monetization, head on over to thepodcasthaven.com. I've got hundreds of articles on the blog covering all things podcasting, equipment, growth, monetization, marketing. Would love for you to check that out. The blog has really been growing, trying to crush it there as well as on this podcast. And your support, your questions, concerns, compliments, or disparaging comments, I love it all. So that's thepodcasthaven.com. And until next time, keep listening, keep engaging, keep creating. I'm out.